Everybody Hates Rand is a Wheel of Time podcast that will contain spoilers for all 14 books. So if you're anti-spoiler, stop this, read all 14 books, and come back. We'll be here, waiting.
Our title is a joke and is meant to be taken as such. Everybody in this context refers to us and our cats. You are free to feel however you want about Rand. He's a fictional character. Please don't DM us.
The world is a mess, Dark One stretching out his hand. The dragon's reborn, the fire's been fanned, but everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
How's everyone doing?
I
Pause for reaction.
Everyone answers back. It's like Dora the Explorer.
Yeah.
What road should we take?
That's a great idea.
That's a good... Okay, well, I could be better personally
Yeah, same.
after reading these chapters, but let's just hop right in, you know? This is Everybody Hates Rand, your friendly neighborhood Wheel of Time podcast. I'm Emily Jushaw.
And I'm Sally Gooder.
And did you know that Geneva Conventions #1 says don't balefire entire fortresses full of people?
That is actually, I can confirm those are the opening lines of the Geneva Convention.
We've done our research. It's, well, I promised you war crimes and I've given you war crimes, you know? What can I say? It's bad. It's bad, y'all. Tybalt?
It is bad.
Hey.
And it's anticlimactic also at the same time, so it's like not only bad morally, but I was reading it and I was like, except for the sort of looming horror that I feel this was an extremely boring chapter.
Yeah, and I have an even worse set of news for everyone. Grendel didn't even die.
That's the other thing that Rand was like, haha, I've mastered my way through this. And I'm like, no, you didn't.
Yeah, like...
Stupid.
The bitch lives.
Where's the body?
Yeah, you can... That's the tough thing with balefire, is you can never have physical body confirmation.
Yeah.
It's a real neat narrative trick of Robert Jordan's to be like, the only thing that can permakill these people is also the only thing that will not give you any proof of their demise.
Loophole.
Tee-hee-hee.
So it was just like dumb.
I spent the entire chapter being like, what was the point of Rand sending this guy in?
Oh, I know.
Like, I fully for a while was just like, he just did that for fun.
It's kind of what it feels like.
It turns out that it's a maneuver. He's like, I'm gonna send this guy in to get compulsioned by Grendel so that I can have confirmation that, Grendel is dead when the compulsion is gone. But Grendel got someone else to do the compulsion, so... I mean, as Forsaken did still die, if that helps everyone. Arengar was the one who did it. We'll get that scene, I think, in the next book. Or maybe at the end of this one, I can't remember. Personally, I'm sick of Grendel, so...
Same.
She should have just died. I also think her threat level has been blown way out of proportion. Like, Rand spends this entire chapter being like, Grendel's just such a smart member of the Forsaken that I can't possibly hope to defeat her. And I'm like, we're talking about Grendel, who was in on Sammael's CubeCon 2000 of the Shadow Ale.
Yeah.
And we're saying she's the most brilliant of the Forsaken?
None of the Forsaken are smart.
None
and I
of
think
them.
We need to just start to acknowledge that.
They're all a bunch of idiots.
They're just running around with their silly little schemes and their silly little plans. There's
only like 5 smart people in the entire Wheel of Time, and none of them are Forsaken. They're all like E2 and Bashir.
Yeah, they're all generals.
They're all military guys, because God forbid anyone else have a brain.
Only the military boys.
Yeah. So, like...
Yeah, so just like I read it and I was like, well, that's a boring way to kill Grendel, and then immediately I was like, she's not dead.
There's no way.
There's no way.
Yeah.
So this was just like, what? The point is, of course, one, to escalate Grendal's threat level even higher. It's like we tried to kill her in the only way Rand could feasibly think to do it, and it didn't succeed. So now how are we going to beat this sort of master strategist, whatever, and to still give us a Forsaken at the end of the book to fight, I guess. And two, perhaps more pressingly, as we head towards Enlightenment Gate 2.9,000, whatever's happening there, Enlightenment Gate is what I'm going to call it.
I think that's great because it's a real, it's a real controversy. Rand's enlightenment.
Yeah.
No one likes it. Just kidding. I'm sure some people on the internet liked it. My high school art teacher liked it a whole lot. I was thinking about this today. Brandon Sanderson famously came to my school one time, and the high school art teacher, who I knew was a fan of Wheel of Time because, like, I don't know, she must have seen me reading it at some point and said something. She was like, she popped her head in just to be like, I just love what you've done with Rand's character. I think only The Gathering, no, Towers of Midnight was out at that point. But Rand isn't really in Towers of Midnight, so it was just like a reference to his enlightenment. And at the time I was like, yeah, who wouldn't like what he's done to Rand's character? Rand was the worst person imaginable, and now he's still a terrible person, but in a, like, slightly different way.
Yeah.
In a slightly less annoying way.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least it's a change of pace.
Sure.
And now I'm just like, girl, yeah, we can all agree that Rand needed to have some sort of, like, character shift or paradigm break, but giving him enlightenment to wipe the slate clean of his literal crimes against humanity is not the way.
Not the way.
Not the way.
This is not the way. We'll get into it a little bit more, but before I lose my point, in my opinion, the main, second point of this chapter is, of course, escalating Rand's bad behavior, because first, we get it through Min's point of view, which alienates and dehumanizes Rand even more. You know, he becomes even more of a monstrous figure when we don't get to see the thought process behind it. And second of all, we just have to, sit there and watch him commit this horrible atrocity, this massacre of hundreds of people without blinking, so.
Yeah, which is in turn meant to push Nynaeve and Min to take desperate action in an effort to change Rand's ways.
Yeah.
And go to Cadsuan and the Wise Ones, as though they would know anything.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to a bunch of women who have had no success with Rand when he was a reasonable person.
Yeah, and who Rand has multiple times said, I hate Cadsuan.
Yeah.
So I really don't trust her, so
to get into the, I say this loosely, scholarly portion of this episode.
You know us. We're real scholars over here at EHR.
Yeah, we have 17 PhDs between the four of us in this household.
Absolutely stacked degrees.
Yeah, Ed holds most of them, as you guys know. Very quick plot summary. We enter Min is watching Rand get dressed. We go through this whole thing about how could Rand possibly get dressed with only one hand, which pisses me off.
Oh my god, yeah. She's like, he's getting so good at it. It's a miracle. And I'm like, yeah, you'd get good at adjusting to having only one limb, obviously.
Yeah, people can exist in the world and function after amputations, so what was the point of this?
We also get the huge revelation that, unlike Rand assumed, that Min, in last chapter, Rand was all like, well, my relationship with Min has changed so much, she's clearly afraid of me for almost killing her. And Min instantly is like, of course I'm not afraid of Rand for almost killing me, I'm just mad because it turns out that he's been right all along, and I shouldn't be with him all the time because when it mattered, one of the Forsaken was able to use me against him.
Yeah.
And I was no help at all.
Yeah. Which
is annoying for its own set of reasons. It's annoying to have that pointed out. Everything in this book particularly, and in the next couple of books, Brandon Sanderson is painstakingly pointing out anything that could be textual subtext. But is just making real sure that we understand everything.
Yeah.
Condescending, as we've said many times. It's annoying because everyone has known that Min was being an idiot about this, and that any time one of Rand's loved ones has said, oh, well, I have to stay with you regardless of the dangers, that it was a stupid idea and that they weren't really taking that fully into consideration.
Yeah.
It's, of course, irritating because anytime someone is like, Rand, Perrin, whoever, I have to stay with you, it's a woman, so, of course, women are
Women are silly. They have no idea how the world works.
It's also irritating that Min can't get a little bit of grace for herself here. Semiraj literally snuck into your bedroom.
Yeah.
It's not like you went on an expedition with Rand where there was danger. It's not like you're beating yourself up over Rand losing his hand in defense of you when you walked into an ambush by Semiraj, which, you know, is maybe something you could beat yourself up over.
Yeah.
And while it was stupid of both of you, as we've said multiple times, to not be like, wow, there's a weird woman in our bedroom when we're about to have sex.
Yeah.
How strange and alarming. Like, no one's giving you points for missing that one.
How bizarre.
But, like, this was not one of the situations that you could have predicted danger.
Yeah.
So, you just can't win, man.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way.
It's like a really astounding level of victim blaming in this instance that we get through Min's point of view. So I think somehow we're supposed to be like, she's correct to blame herself for this.
Yeah, because everyone always has the clearest perspectives about their own role and traumas.
Yeah. It's so annoying. It also makes me really mad that she's not allowed to be afraid of Rand. Like, even if it wasn't like a... Fear is not always a, like, conscious thing, you know? It's not like she's making the conscious decision to be afraid of her partner, but it would be upsetting, and you would probably have flashbacks and all sorts of just, like, fear responses to this person who almost murdered you.
Yeah, she's like, of course I'm not afraid of Rand, because even when he was strangling me, I knew that wasn't him, it was Semiraj, so... And there's that whole, it goes back to the actual scene where Rand is like, even while I'm killing her, she loves me, and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, not to be over dramatic about it, but it's a little insulting to people who have actually, like, been turned on by their partners in ways that their partner could not control. Like, you hear all those stories about, like, army veterans with severe PTSD who wake up from nightmares and harm the person next to them, and 9 times out of 10 that's their wife, you know?
Sure.
And it's like, so are people just supposed to be so clear-minded 100% of the time?
Yeah.
And able to, like, make those distinctions?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, like, logically, you know that it wasn't Rand hurting you, but, like, that's not what your body...
That's what your body remembers.
Your body doesn't care about who was hurting you, just that it was being hurt.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, again, Min is not allowed to have any sort of complicated feelings about Rand. It always just has to be completely black and white. She's 100% devoted to him. And it's annoying. Especially when we get this scene where Min isn't even allowed really to judge or condemn him for what he does. She's just kind of like, wow, baby boy is so hurt. I just wish everyone would stop thinking of Rand as a problem to be solved and more of a human. And I'm like, he just nuked a town, like a castle. So, yeah, he's a problem before he's a human at this moment.
Yeah, like, it's so frustrating. Both that sentiment at the end killed me. She's like, he's just a man who needs help. And he's just, not, she doesn't even say help, I think. She says, like, he's a man in pain or something. Ridiculous nonsense. And it's like, okay, first of all,
Hitler was just a man in pain. Shut up, because he didn't get into art school. Shut up.
Yeah. Men in pain commit atrocities. Men in pain, excuse me, I'm going to put that in quotes. Commit atrocities all the time, and that doesn't, like, wipe the atrocities off the map.
Just because they clearly needed therapy doesn't mean that they didn't do the atrocities.
Yeah. I want to talk about Min and Nynaeve in particular and their response to this, but, like, absolutely speed running this because the nitty gritty does not matter. Rand's plan, he finds out where Grendel is through the boy that he let Nynaeve horrifically murder.
Apparently it's only been a day,
Yeah.
which makes no sense.
It's like, murder of this child.
Immediate meeting with the Shanshin, now we're going to do a nuclear bomb. And somehow in all of that, Rand had time to consult a librarian who took hours to get back to him.
Yeah.
Rand tells us the entire history of this place Grendel is holed up. It's called Natron's Barrow, which is like, bestie, nobody asked.
Yeah.
And nobody cares. He's like, here's the little psychoanalysis behind why Grendel is holed up here. Whatever. He calls Nynaeve, and then he calls this guy who I legitimately had no recollection of. He was like, this is some assistant of so-and-so. And I was like, whomst?
Yeah.
Anyway, this guy shows up, is moderately annoying in the way that every politician we've ever interacted with is annoying.
Yeah.
And Rand is like, well, scoot your booch, go off to meet Grendel.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, this seems like a disproportionate way to handle a person who is just annoying.
Yeah.
But he's like, just go to this castle and see who they are. Do they support the Dragon Reborn? So clearly not giving him all the information. He leaves as soon as he's gone. Nynaeve and Min are like, what the fucking? And Rand is like, follow me. And they travel to this place. It takes this little nobleman exactly 30 seconds to get to and from the castle and interact with, quote, Grendel, unquote.
Yeah.
But when he gets back, Rand is like, hey, Nynaeve, is compulsion on him? Nynaeve's like, yes, it's not as bad as for that little boy guy, but, still quite bad, and I'm not going to just kill this guy, so fuck you.
Yeah.
No, they keep being like, what is your plan here? And Rand just keeps saying dumb shit like, I don't sleep, I only dream. Nynaeve at one point is like, so you just don't answer questions anymore? And Rand death glares her, and I'm like, that was a very valid question of Nynaeve's.
Yeah, I'm also, like, I know everyone keeps being like, Rand is, like, mega scary right now. Like, you have no idea how scary he is. But, like, Nynaeve, Queen of the Death Glare herself, couldn't, like, withstand it a little longer. And Min's like, she grows pale in the face of this. I'm like...
If I asked a man, so are you just not going to answer? I thought men loved answering questions.
Yeah.
What's the deal, homie? And he was like, wah, 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 with his eyeballs. I would laugh at that man.
Yeah, I would be like, you're ridiculous.
This is stupid. You're stupid.
You are a nonsense person.
Like, maybe someone should mock Rand a little, is all I'm saying.
Rand
badly needs a court jester.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. Could you imagine? You're the court jester to the Dragon Reborn, and your whole job is to be like, what an emo loser.
Can you imagine a little guy just jingle-jangling around after Rand? He goes to every single one of Rand's dumb meetings. With the Shanshin, with Semiraj, he goes
my God.
This could have been Asmodean.
Oh,
we were robbed.
My God, you're right. We were robbed of court jester Asmodene.
Except Asmodene was, like, not nearly as funny. I need an actual funny man. Just a funny little
Just a
guy.
funny little weirdo who's like, okay.
Listen, you guys, sometimes court jesters play an invaluable role, both in politics and in the narrative.
Yeah.
And that we weren't given one here is ludicrous.
And cruel.
Cruel and unusual.
Cruel and unusual. It would be so good.
Yeah. Then it's like, maybe instead of doing a mass crime against humanity, Rand could have murdered the court jester, which would have been a huge tragedy, but then it would have been like, you know, this really touching scene of like weeping over his court jester's body.
Yeah.
And being like, what have I done?
Yeah.
I've killed all the good in the world.
I've killed all the good in the world. It would also be very symbolic of Rand, like, a big role that court jesters play, of course, is like the pushing on the ego of the king, you know, like
and being able to like say executable things, you know, technical treason, and get away with it.
Yeah, and so for Rand to, like, keep the court jester around, be like, I'm willing to tolerate mockery and criticism and dissension and all this stuff for a long time, and then suddenly he kills the court jester. It's like, that I feel like would be a much less horrific and very potent turn of Rand's character.
I agree. It would be so potent. I think it would be equally horrific because what happens here with Rand bale firing, that's what happens next. Rand uses his little nuclear codes, as we've been calling them, to bale fire the entire, like, castle.
Yeah, with hundreds of people.
Hundreds of people
living and working.
Yeah,
there.
like they can see little people moving around down there,
doing their jobs.
Just wipes it out of existence. And it's like, that obviously is horrifying, and it transcends murder and becomes a crime against humanity, as I believe we'll talk about in a minute. But there's a problem with narratives trying to escalate violence just in, like, ascending order of how they would be treated in a criminal court,
quote unquote magnitude, or like the amount of bodies almost.
Yeah, like using a body count to be like, well, obviously killing 10 people is more horrifying than killing one person.
Yeah.
And I just think that sort of like gets away from the point of murder generally, which is that like it's always going to be bad no matter who you do it to, no matter how many people you murder. Mm-hmm. Like, a human life is a human life.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, I think Rand actually killing someone who was close to him would have been a far more, like, interesting way to narrate the sort of descent that he is in right now than just him being like, I'm going to use my nukes.
No, totally. That is an extremely good point, and I agree. One of the, like, problems with depicting crimes against humanity and, like, mass murder and massacre is that, like, at some point you reach a body count that becomes, like, unfathomable to people, and it's, like, hard for you to wrap your head around the idea of killing that many people. You know, it just becomes almost like a blank space in your head. Because it's just like, okay, I know it was bad, but, like, there's no real way for me to access that, almost. Like, it's so distant.
Yeah, like, the objective knowledge that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust is almost of secondary importance to the subjective knowledge of perhaps experiencing the Holocaust Museum and actually, like, acquainting oneself with human stories.
Yeah, and, like, the victims and the personhood of those people.
Right.
So there is certainly something to be said for, like, tragedy has more impact in, like, a narrative form when it is smaller and, like, more easily digestible.
For sure.
So I think that's a really good point. Wow, I can't believe we fixed Rand's descent into
just by giving him a court jester.
Just by giving him a court jester.
I legitimately have never wanted more to write fan fiction.
Yeah. Court jester time! Emily, you would write such a good fan fiction about that court jester. His death would be so tragic. I would legitimately weep.
I'd have to decide what his whole
deal vibe is.
Like,
Gotta give him a name.
What's the,
a little French jester.
Little French guy.
My gosh.
Just a little rando. Who knows?
Gotta give him a name and a whole life.
I'll think about it.
Okay.
I'll come back and he'll be, you know, next episode.
He'll be really fully fleshed out
for him. He'll have a D&D subclass. I'll be ready to go.
Okay, as we keep referencing, I did just want to, perhaps briefly, perhaps not, there's not a whole lot to talk about with Egg. It's just, Egg is the second chapter, and just like, ooh, politics, Aleda's a maniac.
As usual.
Surprise. So we keep using these phrases, particularly throughout this book, war crime, crimes against humanity, violation of human rights. And all of these things, if you dig into, like, the legal theory behind them and the ethics behind them, get really complicated. But briefly, to just talk about particularly war crimes and crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity is the, like, top umbrella, and war crime is actually, like, a crime against humanity that sits under the idea of crimes against humanity. War crimes, my understanding is they're basically the same thing, but they take place in the context of a war. And so the idea, again, this is my, I'm not a sort of legal scholar or anything. The idea with war crimes, of course, is that there's this sort of code of conduct that people are supposed to be following. Like, you shouldn't
murder civilians.
Murder civilians and execute prisoners and all that sort of stuff. There's an idea that you should be conducting warfare in a particular fashion, which if you chew on that in any particular way becomes sort of a bizarre thought experiment. Like,
Yeah, we have to kill each other, but we have to do it nicely.
yeah, like,
It's a little ridiculous, but
okay.
we as a general populace have decided that that's better than just having anarchic warfare.
So crimes against humanity, I have the Wikipedia page up because of course Wikipedia makes things more digestible. So just going to read some sections of this. Crimes against humanity are widespread or systemic criminal acts which are committed by or on behalf of a de facto authority, usually by or on behalf of a state, that grossly violate human rights. And we could talk about what a human right is like forever, but it's generally the type of stuff you think of, you know, humans have a right to be alive and not be tortured and have access to food and shelter and those types of things.
All of the victims of Grendel have a right to live, despite the fact that they have been put under a sort of horrible mental manipulation by Grendel.
Yeah.
And they are now considered by Rand, at least, to be subhuman.
Yeah.
They still have a right to live.
Yep. They still have a, like it says literally here in this thing, the terms crimes against humanity is potentially ambiguous because of the ambiguity of the word humanity, which can mean humankind, all human beings collectively, or the value of humanness. And it says the history of the term shows that the latter sense is intended, which, again, kind of get into that, but I think if we talk about which can mean humankind, like, people have very different definitions of what that means. Like, Rand in this instance is not considering those people perhaps as part of his humankind, but they are still humans and they have a value of humanness.
Yeah, and to the point of that, like, definition, that differing definition, it is still a crime against humanity because Rand is committing a crime against what we consider to be good humanity.
Yeah.
You know, a general, like, character, the general human conscience,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
What that is also saying.
Yeah, that's a good point, Emily. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, unlike war crimes, crimes against humanity do not have to take place within the context of wars, and they apply to widespread practices rather than acts which are committed by individuals necessarily. It's like, what are people doing on, like, Rand is committing crimes on a regular basis, I think, at this point. Although crimes against humanity apply to acts which are committed by or on behalf of authorities, they do not need to be part of an official policy, and they only need to be tolerated by authorities. So I think that is an interesting thing to talk about, where it's like, I don't think Rand would ever sit down and say his policy is to just kill whoever gets in his way. Maybe he would. But what I think is, again, this, like, piece that I kind of want to hit on is this idea of, like, they just need to be tolerated by the authorities. Like, nobody is punishing Rand for what he is doing, you know, in any particular context. If the authorities are allowing something to happen, that doesn't necessarily mean it's legal. It's still a crime against humanity, but nobody is going after them.
Yeah,
So-
this is, I think, if we're looking at the Wheel of Time narratively, this is a reversal of Rand's position in earlier books, where in every country he conquered, he was doing sort of like, he was creating new laws and consequences of violating laws, particularly in regards to, like, the Ale, who are an invading force under Rand's command, cannot go around killing, like, civilians.
Yeah.
And, you know, he established the death penalty for that, which is its own thing, but, like, Rand was not tolerating that sort of behavior.
Yeah.
As opposed to now, where he is perpetrating sort of that behavior on, like, literally with his own hand.
With his own hand. And also, as we touched on when we talked extensively about how Rand is not held to any consequences, nobody does anything about this.
Yeah.
Like,
Min and Nynaeve, after this, Nynaeve is like, Nynaeve says this is intolerable, basically.
Yeah.
She's like, this is loathsome. What you've just done is terrible.
yeah.
And Rand is just like, well, you know what they say, fuck 'em. And Nynaeve's like, okay, I'll go to Cadsuan. But it's like, Cadsuan's not gonna do anything to hold Rand accountable.
Yeah.
No one is holding Rand accountable. Nynaeve and Min's reaction to this is we have to change Rand, not hold him accountable.
Yeah.
Which, is a consequence of a sort, but not any sort of retributive consequence.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody is holding Rand accountable for anything. Cadswan's plan does not seem to be like, we need to commit some sort of coup, or Rand is going to continue to nuke people.
Yeah.
She's like, Nynaeve, why don't you go find Perrin? He's going to be important in this.
Somehow.
So, I think, I know I'm making this more complicated, but I get really caught up in the fact that I don't fully understand ethics or legal terms, so I might not be using all of this correctly, so I apologize if you are someone who understands this in more depth, and I have interpreted something wrong, but I just get really stuck on this idea of, like, so the difference between war crimes and crimes against humanity is that crimes against humanity can happen whenever. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like, World War II for someone to be like, you can't massacre people because you can't do that, which is what Rand has just done. He has used, there's a whole list here, and I'm just going to list off the ones that I think Rand has hit so far.
Fun.
War crimes. He's done crimes in the middle of a war. Murder, massacres, dehumanization, deportations. I would say that Nynaeve taking the compulsion off that child could in a way qualify as unethical human experimentation. Extrajudicial punishments, including the use of weapons of mass destruction, death squads, kidnappings, the use of child soldiers, maybe. Narishma's like 17. Unjust imprisonment, torture, political repression. So that was like, what, 15?
Yeah, Rand's done a lot of things that are bad. Yeah, and I guess, like, to head this off, I guess you could argue that what happened here was a war crime because Rand was at war with the Shadow generally and therefore Grendel.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of, like, the definitions here, this isn't a war that is being regulated in the terms of, like, the way that we have... If it's a war crime, it's because it's a sort of, an acknowledged war.
Sure.
And what Rand is doing here is more of an ideological war than an actual war, at least until the last battle.
Sure, and I only bring up the distinction because there is a distinction, and we most typically say war crimes because generally the book is
about war.
War. The distinction is more or less irrelevant, as we discussed the idea of whether or not you are killing some people in an okay way or killing other people in a not okay way. Doesn't really mean a whole lot to me, personally.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is like in the context of how these terms are used in, like, international courts, they are slightly different. And yeah, I think in this particular instance, it elevates itself as, I don't think I shouldn't say that. It's not like a scale, as though crimes against humanity are worse than certain war crimes. But the idea more generally is, like, yeah, Rand does not, like, storm this fortress. He does not do any sort of act of war against these people. It's just, like, annihilated, you know? So it certainly is, it's just fucked. I don't know. I just wanted to bring some of that, like, language and theory to what we're talking about to kind of back up what we've been saying over the past couple of episodes about Rand committing atrocities that, if there were anything like an international court in this world, would be recognized as crimes against humanity and war crimes, and the way that, particularly, like, it's not just, like, one sort of terrorist committing these acts, as it's talking about. It's not just, like, an individual who is doing something, which is, of course, horrible. It's elevated to the state level. Rand is the state, capital T, capital S, in this world. And he is making these decisions unilaterally. He's just doing them. And they are being absolutely 100% tolerated by his quote-unquote government, or the quote-unquote state, because he is the state. At this point, he is a tyrant. But they're also being tolerated by his advisors because nobody is taking really any direct action to try and prevent this in the future or to hold Rand accountable. So that's trying to summarize the thoughts I've said more sporadically throughout the episode, but that was my intention in bringing that. Chew on it as it makes sense to you.
Yeah,
so
thanks. I think the question here becomes, is this working on the narrative level?
Yeah.
What Rand does here is objectively bad, as we have just proven.
Yeah.
It's a crime against humanity. The book itself makes some effort to acknowledge that it is a crime against humanity, not through consequences, but by other characters' reactions. Min and Nynaeve are horrified by what has happened. It remains, unfortunately, a, gray situation in the fact that Rand extensively tries to justify it. Mm-hmm. And again, the only perspectives we're getting are Rand justifying it and a bunch of women who have spent the entire series doing their own arguable crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
Saying, well, that wasn't great. So it's not like we're having any sort of... The narrative isn't really coming down on Rand, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Obviously, every book doesn't have to portray a bad thing that a character does, and then the character gets punished for doing the bad thing. This isn't Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. But then the question is it working like the authors intended to? And this is, I believe, meant to embody sort of the absolute lowest point for Rand.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's all uphill from here.
Yeah.
Not quite in the literal sense, but, here we're at the lowest, and so now we're going to reach enlightenment. But I think we've pretty strongly made the argument already that because Rand reaches enlightenment without having to reckon with any of these things, including this lowest point, it doesn't work in the narrative. This could be a very powerful narrative choice if it was something that Rand had to reckon with, if it was something any other characters had to reckon with.
Yeah.
If it was treated at all like an actual thing that happened and not just sort of like a thought exercise of what if the Dragon Reborn did a bad thing kind of off screen of everyone else.
Yeah, what would we do about it? What would we as allegedly his
supporters
tolerate? Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. I don't think it's working on the narrative level. It's also just I think in part because it's not surprising at this point. At no way am I Rand has reached his lowest watching this. I'm Rand has already reached his lowest.
Yeah.
He's already obviously this is horrific, but again, there's not some sort of delineated sign where it's you step past this and you've become
a bad guy.
Rand has been going there for a long time in the way that he treats people and the way that he considers decision making and all sorts of stuff. So I'm just okay, this isn't surprising at this point. It's awful and I hated reading about it. But so it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't particularly strike me as the abyss. Usually when you see a character reach a low point, there's sort of a way that you can feel that, usually because there's something afterward where the character has to be fuck.
Yeah.
They have to reckon with that decision and being I'm not happy with the decision that I made, or even just being that was bad.
Yeah, in a way this is almost meant to be lower than rock bottom, because the abyss in Rand's case, and as the narrative very strenuously tried to convince us, was him attacking Min.
Good point.
And so everything past that has been bad, and it's just meant to be oh, well, but it's not as bad because Rand doesn't care as much.
Yeah.
So it's not a character abyss so much as it is just in terms of scale, a legal abyss.
Let's see, you've gone past the sort of individual crime through war crimes to crimes against humanity, all sorts of stuff. And also to I know I always bring this up, so here we go. To step out of this narrative itself, just about Rand, into just the general way that this series and this book in particular has been presenting crimes against humanity and atrocities. There is such a level of dehumanization and desensitizing of these things. In no way do we linger on them, and in no way are we allowed to see them really. Like, we never have, because we're not reckoning with the consequences, because we're not really, like, seeing what happened inside this castle. And not necessarily that, like, we could reckon with that without seeing what happened, but, like, we are in no way being asked to, like, actually witness the things that are going on. And this is the way that real world atrocities are used all the time. I talked a lot about this when I was writing about how we present the Holocaust, but you can see in a lot of media where it's just like, you know, slavery or police brutality or anything is used as a sort of like story point rather than being like, this is a thing that really happens. And by not letting us sit with that, it's just like it's just insensitive to use it as like a stepping stone. I know these are not real. This is not a real world event, but it's just like representative of the way that we treat these sort of things as just like narrative tools rather than something to really sit with. So yeah. That's my soapbox for a second.
For sure.
Sorry, we've talked a lot about this.
No, it's a thing worth talking about.
But in summary, I don't think it's working for Rand. I don't think there was any point to it.
Yeah, I didn't even take Grendel off the board, so...
Bad.
Yeah.
Thumbs down.
And taking Arengar off the board, if that's what you want to argue, was, like, sort of a null point at this...
Yeah, what was Arengar even doing?
Yeah, she had already been kicked out of the Aes Sedai camp, so she had sort of receded as a character anyway.
Yeah, she was not a threat at this point.
The other chapter we read involves Egg and Teleron Riyadh. Swan tries to convince her to let them rescue her. Egg's like, no, as usual. But as soon as she exits Teleron Riyadh, of course, there's like a whole thing about Swan being like, oh, and Gawain's here. And then Egg has to go on like a little walking around tour and be like, well, I can't just let my concern for the world in the White Tower overcome my libido. I still want to fuck Gawain, so that's still important. People need to be happy still, even when they're politicians. It's so stupid. Then she wakes up and is pretty quickly informed that she is being released. She has to piece this together throughout the chapter, but what happened was that Sylviana, the mistress of novices who Egg has been interacting with, basically bitched Eleda out for what she's doing to Egg and was like, you absolutely cannot do this, you absolute idiot. And Eleda is now punishing Sylviana for that. She's been replaced as mistress of novices by Katarine. This in turn has destabilized the entire Red Aja because Sylviana is also of the Red Aja, so now there's like a rift there.
Yeah, the girls are fighting.
And Egg is like, dear God, everything's gonna fall apart. She's all in a rush. She manages to get her handlers, who are of the Red Aja, off her to go try and like deal with this crisis. And in exchange, she takes a bunch of fork root to prevent her from channeling. Which will be important in a minute. And then she walks into her room, and there is Varen, who promptly lies in a dumb way to be like, guess what?
I'm not born, so...
I can lie.
What am I trying to say? Yeah. It's also so funny to me that Varen was like, have she just been sitting in Egg's room for like days on end? Yeah. What's going on?
I think she'll tell us in a minute, but it is extremely funny to just think of her being like,
when's she coming?
Wonder when she's gonna get let out of prison. Like, bestie? Okay. And that's where we leave Egg. The next chapter will be our big Varen reveal, where Varen will tell us not just that she is Black Aja, but also the context behind it, how she has used that throughout her life, ultimately for good, blah, 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 blah. And then we will get into the climactic sequence of this book, which is the Shanshan attack on the White Tower.
Boo. Speaking of crimes against humanity.
Yeah, seriously. Crimes against... Yeah. I think another point of this narratively was to be like, Rand is just as bad as the Shanshan. And it's just like...
And it's like, that has no value to me because, like...
I've always known the Shanshan are very bad, and the title of my podcast is Everybody Hates Rand.
It has no value to me. And also, like, I don't give a shit about comparing tyrants.
Yeah.
It's not...
Oh, two states are bad?
Breaking news. Breaking news. You can't trust the government.
Oh, no.
Whatever. What a weird thing to be talking about the week that Oppenheimer gets released.
Yeah, enjoy, I guess.
Whatever. Thanks for going on that Crimes Against Humanity sidebar with me, everybody.
Thanks for going on this quest with us, and just tonight when you're trying to go to sleep, remember the court jesters that could have been.
Ugh. The court jester never would have stood for this.
Yeah.
The court jester would hold Rand to consequences. That's why he'd be murdered, but
Yeah.
that's the point.
Just jangling his way around the world, being like, you're bad. You're
Like,
bad and evil.
You're also boring. Have
Yeah.
you considered being less boring and more fun?
And your mom's a hoe!
Rand would be the type of guy to react to that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, those are those chapters.
Yeah, thanks for listening, I guess. Thanks to Glenna McKenzie for our theme song. Thanks to our patrons on Patreon and our followers on social media.
Yeah, you guys are the best, as always.
Do you have a sign off?
Oh, this is just more like medical drama from Sally's life. My insurance plan changed recently due to our fiscal year. I have to go pick up my big allergy medication, and the pharmacist lady told me it was going to be $370. That's going to be my copay. I'm just like hemorrhaging money at the moment.
Speaking of crimes against humanity, how about that U.S. healthcare system?
How about having to pay for medications? What?
Yeah.
How does that make sense?
Okay, everyone. Have a nice week.
Yeah, have a good one.
Goodbye.
Don't do war crimes.
Jesus Christ.